Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the mornings. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It's July. You've made it to July 1st. Tuesday, July 1st, to be specific. 2025. Just so you mark your place in time and space. And that kind of rhymes. That could be a really, hype DJ kind of thing. Hey, it's marketplace in time and space, ladies and gentlemen. Very exciting. Anyway, just barely sort of making it to the microphone on time today, and a little rough in the start. For those of you who are listening live and had the stream open, it may have sounded a little bit weirder than it usually does, but I think from here on in, everything will be okay. The podcast should be fine. It's a Tuesday, we're on our own, and tomorrow, Wednesday, will be our last live show of the week as we prepare to take off into the wilds once again. So, working on how I'll be handling those days off. Not quite sure yet. The obvious answer, try and record some shows ahead of time. But if you've ever been through that mass recording session, and let's say you have been through it 2 weeks earlier, it's nothing to look forward to. But there are a lot of stories that I really would like to get to that, once again, have piled up in Pocket, and Pocket's going to disappear. I think by the time we're back, we'll be in the last several days of Pocket, and I really just haven't given any thought to what I'm going to use next. If you have any suggestions, by the way, that would be most welcome, and I don't know which direction we'll go, but if there's anything you use that you find particularly simple and easy to use, particularly something that might have a browser button so that when I open up these things on a phone or on the desktop or whatever, and you're reading the story, you say, hey, I'd like to put that away for later. It doesn't have to have much in the ways of bells and whistles. I tend not to use them anyway. But okay. I digress, because the country's falling apart, and we should be watching that happen. All right, let's see. Congress continues to work on this horrific thing, the one and only item on Donald Trump's agenda, and they continue twisting arms to try to make it happen. This is going to become a thing eventually, no matter how you slice it. And the question is whether or not they're going... I guess it's now down to whether or not they're going to be able to force Lisa Murkowski to come around and accept this bill in the form that they give it to her, that is, without the bailout for the non-contiguous states, wink, wink, i.e. hers, and also Hawaii. I did see something earlier today, although I let it go without putting it aside and noting it, and we'll see if I can't find it soon enough. And let's see. Well, so many people commenting on what's going on this terrible thing. It's very tempting to try to find some other name for it than the big beautiful bill thing, because Trump did that, and why grant him the satisfaction? But I don't know if it makes any difference one way or the other. But I did see somebody saying, and if I spend some time searching for it, I can find it and credit the right person for having done it. But pointing out that I guess there was and this is an interesting exercise in legislative sausage making, as they like to say. I don't like to say it, but other people like to say it. Let's see. This was an amendment offered by Susan Collins. She was deeply concerned, of course, as you know, and troubled, as she always is, by what the bill did in general. And let's see. Here we are. Is it James Downey who makes this observation? James Downey is a columnist and editor at MSNBC Daily, and that's good news. Formerly with the Washington Post opinions page, D.C. born and raised. In case you were interested in his personal history, but D.C. born and raised means I guess grew up in the environs, and so in covering Congress, I guess he's got a good eye for it. he points out that Senate Dems often get a lot of flack, often deserved, but they deserve credit for this. Are you ready for this one? Because this is interesting. Because if we just reported straight up kind of what they did, you'd say, well, wait a minute, they deserve flack. Why did they vote against this thing? There was an amendment offered to the one big beautiful bill that would have established a special tax bracket, a surtax on multimillionaires. So the very rich would have their own tax bracket, a little higher, I guess. It would also would have doubled the rural hospital fund, such that, well, I mean, the idea, of course, being, well, the rural hospitals in particular are said to be getting pummeled by this bill. All hospitals will be pummeled by this bill because of the Medicaid changes, but rural hospitals in particular, where a higher percentage of the patients, you know the story, are covered by Medicaid, et cetera, et cetera. So why would the Democrats come to the floor and vote against an amendment that would seek to double the funding for rural hospitals, presumably to alleviate that problem, and add a surtax on multimillionaires? And the answer is, as James puts it, Senate Dems came to the floor to do this to deny Susan Collins the fig leaf that she needed in order to come and show up and vote yes on all the other horrible parts of this bill. So it's a very strategic thinking. Yeah, I mean, if it does anything, but I think that's good strategic and realistic thinking, right? So now this denies Collins the fig leaf she needed and letting Republicans escape from this farce. And he points out even a doubled rural hospital fund is a pittance compared to the damage that the Medicaid cuts will do. So given that, one, the amendment could pass, and as David Dayen was hinting yesterday, although I still don't quite understand what it was he was talking about in terms of a wraparound amendment, we must have seen it before, but in a different form, or with a different name, I guess. But essentially, it sounds like what he was describing was a process whereby the Senate Majority Leader allows amendments that, he just can't stop because they're going to get a floor vote and they're going to pass, and he doesn't like them, he doesn't want them in the bill. He sort of takes another pass at things at the end of the vote-a-rama and offers an amendment encompassing I would imagine it encompasses the original text of the bill as amended by the amendments that he likes, and not including the amendments he didn't like, and make that a substitute at the last minute for the existing text of the bill, and, rally your troops to have the majority come out and exercise their raw power as a majority now that there's no filibuster standing in the way, and just say, all the things that we voted on before, who cares? There's a new substitute bill text that doesn't include the things that I was just kidding about before, and let's adopt that. So you can go back and erase the thing. In all likelihood, as James points out, that doesn't really help very much with the rural hospitals anyway. So even if it passed and Republicans accepted it and you passed it, you'd just kill rural hospitals by I don't know, whatever, ruining 200% of their budget instead of 300% of their budget, nuking it twice instead of 3 times. And, it was all likely to be erased anyway, not to mention the fact that, you have a president who might just say, no, we're not doing this and you can't stop me. Who knows? But in all likelihood, although there'll be a vote on the record saying that, you voted against rural hospitals and you voted against helping alleviate the problems of Medicaid cuts, or you voted against taxing the rich. Who's going to run those ads? If anybody, I guess it could be like, I suppose, progressive challengers to them in a primary, but hopefully their primary challengers will be able to understand the strategic nature of the vote and probably don't parse down to that. And there's plenty they can run against them with anyway. It's not going to be Republicans running those ads. I mean, not because of the hypocrisy, but because they just don't care and they don't need to reach down to that level and run those ads. Plus, of course, there is at least that bit of hypocrisy. Wait a minute, you're going to destroy that, and and you're against taxing multimillionaires. Oh, right. You got me there. So an interesting twist. That's very interesting. And, so James down, by the way, I should point out here, now that I read down, James is responding to a post on Blue Sky from David Dayen, who likewise is pointing out that this is the strategy here. So the two of them both get credit for pointing that out. David puts it this way: Collins' amendment for a multimillionaire tax bracket and doubling the rural hospital fund is getting crushed on the Senate floor right now, but it had enough Republican votes to pass. The Democrats strategically voted against it because it denies Collins a fig leaf to vote for the final bill. So there you go. I found that interesting and worthwhile, and hope you did too. And I would say I'd put it away in Pocket for you, but Pocket is no longer making it easy, and they got rid of their browser button. So I got to go to Pocket, and you're going to go with me because it's a live show, and I will enter the URL by copy and paste, put it away, and then we can find it later, and then I don't have to keep this window open. Isn't that great? Okay. So lots of other stories to catch up on. Trying to decide which ones we'll shoehorn in today and which ones we will reserve, in the hopes that I find the energy and will to record new material for the now 3 days that I think we will miss on the air. And we'll do it this way. I'll give myself hope by saying, well, what if we put together 1 hour shows? And then this is the trick. I know you're like, oh, 1 hour show. I wanted the full 2 hours. You might get it anyway. I went into it last time saying, well, I've got 5 shows to produce before I go away. Let's be honest. I'm only going to be able to do 1 hour shows. And I went into it with that expectation. And then, of course, I was like, no, this story has to be read. And then, what about this one? Oh, wait, this reminds me of another one. And pretty soon, I'm like, well, what can I cut out to fit under the 10 hours I've given myself to share new material with everybody? There's always something. But then there's the physical limitation of it's 1,000 degrees. And although we air condition the inside of KITM World Headquarters, it takes its toll. Anyhow, let's see. Here's what's new and fun and exciting in the end of America. A new story that I don't know how much attention it's going to get outside of... it's been written about by the New York Times. Let's not pretend they're ignoring the thing. But among the collection of problems we're amassing, it's maybe not likely to get the most attention. And it's serious enough. Well, serious enough the New York Times covered it, and I'm going to do it too. Trump steps up pressure campaign on Powell with handwritten note. Who's Powell? You remember Powell, right? It's not Colin Powell. That wouldn't make any sense. President Trump has repeatedly attacked Jerome H. Powell, chair of the Federal Reserve. Why? Because he controls money and Trump wants that money, and why aren't you just emptying the Federal Reserve and the gold reserves and putting it in Mar-a-Lago? Is really what it's all about. But in this case, he's disguising it as something else. President Trump has repeatedly attacked him for resisting his demands to lower interest rates. And I guess the prop that he used for this, he must have thought that the tariff chart, the physical tariff chart that he had produced and blown up to poster size that he could pull out at a press babbling or whatever it was they called it, was successful. And so, well, I don't know whether I shouldn't say he made this decision. Oh, that was successful. We should do that again. What I mean is, today when he found his way to the Oval Office, yesterday, whatever, somebody gave him a large format, like on a big piece of paper, not a poster. So like maybe the 11 by 17 papers. They have that in the copiers at the White House. They made him a big blowed up chart with world central bank rates, but also a presidential seal up at the top, because world, F the world, show me United States of America. And then ranking countries from lowest to highest central bank prime rates, essentially. And wouldn't you know it, the United States is not number one. And why is that the case? And we're going to have to kill the guy because, so this is what he did. So he gets this chart, and it looks like we are number 35 in the world, which just I should say initially, who effing cares? What difference does that make at all? You could say, look, if you're upset about interest rates being too high and you have a cogent argument for why they're too high and why lowering them won't do damage, then by all means, talk to the folks at the Federal Reserve. They've probably already had that discussion. I understand why Trump thinks he wants interest rates lower the cost of, of capital, lower the cost of money, presumably spurs purchases in housing sector and maybe the auto loans. I don't know whether it really impacts auto loans the same way it does housing, but just in general. And of course, lowering the cost of money. It makes it easier to get your hands on cash. I love getting my hands on cash. You might not even need any. And of course, the United States government is borrowing heavily in order to do all of the things that it does, including quote unquote, pay for the big, beautiful bill, which is going to add trillions to the deficit. But who cares? Because that's not a real thing, at least when Republicans are in office. But, as we've found out, it's actually not a real thing ever. But we like to make Republicans think we're serious and worrying about things that they say that they demand we worry about, but that they not worry about. And for some reason, we want to accommodate them on that. So, all right, lower the interest rate. So we're 35th on the list. Switzerland, in case you were wondering, is tops on the list. But that's only because everything's a secret. So they can't charge you interest or else people will find out who has loans. And they're just do secret banking there. That's not really the reason. But Trump, well, I'll tell you the story. Or I will let Colby Smith tell you the story and then read it in my voice. Thank you, Colby, for writing this down. President Trump stepped up his pressure on the Federal Reserve to lower borrowing costs on Monday, accusing its chair, Jerome H. Powell, in a handwritten note of costing the country a fortune and demanding that he cut interest rates by a lot. It's just in case you thought that there should be specifics about that. The list that he has here shows, can I enlarge this thing? It's a video, but I can probably enlarge the whole screen. By the way, Switzerland, as we said, topping the list, by which we mean being on the bottom of the list in terms of the lowest rate, 0.25% is their prime lending rate, and the United States is at 4.5%. All right. Now, the percentage is supposed to make sense for the country you're in, and it doesn't necessarily make any sense that we would say, well, what about Switzerland? Why do they have it? Well, it's a different country with a different economy and different conditions. That's all. But no. Anyway, so that's what he grabbed, and he wrote this note on this chart, whereon someone else used not real highlighter, but I think the highlighting tool on the computer, and it printed out then highlighted in yellow the United States, and also every other country that is tied, I guess, with the United States at 4.5% is likewise highlighted, which doesn't make any particular sense at all, except that I guess the only country I can see in this cropped photo that's next, I guess number 36 looks like to be maybe partially Cameroon. And I guess maybe, is that supposed to be the idea? What are we tied with the whole country for? Something like that. But anyway, by the way, lower rates among other nations that he would consider, S-holes, would probably include, let's see, Cambodia, by the way, number 2 on the list. So you totally want to compare yourself to any list that goes. All right, so this is probably a good idea, right? Before we get into the nonsense of the real reporting, how nonsensical is this list? Never mind the numbers. I can't tell you. I'm not going to read all of those, but they're below 4.5%. And the nearest number lower than us is a 4.4%. Everything else is down low. So under 1%, I guess we'll say. Switzerland, Cambodia, Japan. Go ahead and find the commonality there. Why aren't we there? And on his handwritten note, by the way, it brackets this and the other countries, or he thinks we should be somewhere in between 1% and 1.75%. There's some arrows here, and it says should be here on the thing. This is how he's going to set the rates. He's going to send him a note that says this is where we should be on this list, somewhere in the top 7, I guess, unless I can't tell whether he's bracketing the top 7 or drawing arrows both from the top of the list and from slightly down below the list, pointing upward to the point where he thinks we should be, somewhere between, I guess actually between 0.5% and 1.75%. Should be here. So what sort of fiscal policies do you think we should be following if the example is we need to find our way in somewhere in line after Switzerland, Cambodia, Japan, but ahead of Denmark, well-developed, thoroughly developed European and integrated market. Seychelles, less so, I would say. Thailand, Botswana, Barbados. Like, I don't know if we're really finding economic models in common here, except that they all happen to have low prime borrowing rates from their central banks. I don't know how their currencies are doing. I don't know how their economies are doing. Neither does he. He just wants to be in a certain place on the list. But it's interesting that he doesn't want to be number 1 on the list. That is interesting. That's very sophisticated. I don't want to be number 1. I want to show people that I've done sophisticated analysis. Where should we be? We should be here by a lot. So, I mean, that's it. Barbados, I stopped at number 8. Eurozone, number 9. That is an interesting country. Trump probably thinks, yeah, that's like, I think, a video arcade in Europe, but it's so huge, it's its own country. It's big. They have tiny countries in some cases in Europe. All right, Taiwan, Bulgaria, Cuba. What? Sweden, Morocco, Cabo Verde, South Korea, Algeria, Canada, Albania, borders on the Adriatic, but it borders actually on number 20, Libya, Malaysia, China, New Zealand, Trinidad and Tobago. Did they say Tobago or Tobago? I don't know. I'll have to go down there and find out. It's beautiful. Czechia, Bolivia, Australia, all the E's, Costa Rica, the Bahamas, Kuwait, Papua New Guinea, Bosnia and Herzegovina, United Kingdom, United Arab Emirates, United States of America. Oh, it's so sad that we're down there. Well, I don't know. I mean, that leaves, so that's puts us 35th out of like 200 countries, but I don't know. I'm not certain whether there's any fiscal policy or reasoning behind it. But as we said, Trump has now taken this thing out and he's scrolled on it. Jerome, I'll see what I can make out here. Jerome, you are, as usual, oh, I'm sorry, this is his voice. You are, as usual, quote, too late. You have cost the USA a fortune and continue to do so. You should lower the rate, hyphen, by a lot. Not hyphen, but dash, I presume. Hundreds of billions of dollars being lost. No. I can't. No. This is really. No inflation. Okay. There you go. Hundreds of billions being lost. No inflation. So you want zero inflation. It doesn't really work out, even if you write a big note. And then he scribbles Trump on the bottom. So there you go. We'll see whether they try to sane wash this and turn it into any sort of fiscal policy. In a separate social media post on Monday, Mr. Trump said Mr. Powell and his colleagues on the Fed's boards of governors. It's hilarious watching them. Mr. this, Mr. that. By a lot. Yeah, right. Okay. Mr. Trump said Mr. Powell and his colleagues on the Fed's board of governors who vote on every monetary policy decision, quote, should be ashamed of themselves for allowing this to happen to the United States. If they were doing their job properly, our country would be saving trillions of dollars in interest cost. Mr. Trump wrote, the board just sits there and watches, so they are equally to blame. The criticism is the latest in months of attacks in which Mr. Trump has insinuated Mr. Powell directly and has even threatened to fire him as chair. This is, I guess, where it gets to be practical. On Friday, the president encouraged Mr. Powell to resign before his term as chair is up in May. Mr. Powell can stay on as governor until 2028 if he chooses. I'm not sure how that works. Mr. Trump has also floated naming a replacement for Mr. Powell long before his term expires, a move that could complicate communications for the Fed. I'm sure that's the chief worry. The next opening on the Fed board is for the slot occupied by Adriana Kugler, whose term is set to expire in January. On Monday, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent floated the idea of appointing Mr. Powell's successor to that position and later elevating that person to the chair. Similar, I would guess, I guess the parallel there is the way John Roberts was placed on the court and then elevated when the time came. I think that's what happened with him, right? He didn't just immediately... Did he immediately drop into the chief role? I don't think so. Anyway, one prerequisite for the chair is that the person must be willing to lower interest rates, Mr. Trump said on Friday, a pledge that risks undermining the central bank's longstanding independence from the White House. It does. In fact, it would totally obliterate it, but at least he would have obliterated something. Hi, everybody. It's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and Patreon.com, Patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, Patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Still a billion degrees outside, and we're still trying to find out whether there's any sense at all. I don't know if this article can actually tell us. I don't know if anybody can tell us. But we'll have to talk to an economist. Does it make any sense at all to say that we're costing the United States money unnecessarily, or money at all, by having a higher than necessary, although I think the Fed board thinks that the rate they have is necessary, but that's by definition. They think everything they do is necessary. And they might even be right, I don't know. But does it cost the United States money when the interest rate is higher? And I mean, the United States is constantly borrowing money to finance its operations. It's not necessarily borrowing at all from American banks or the Federal Reserve doing the borrowing, but when it floats bonds, I guess Americans and American interests buy a significant portion of those bonds, and they're earning money on them, and presumably, well, maybe this is the problem. They're supposed to be paying taxes on that, and maybe they're not. It keeps bank revenues high. They, make more money as they charge more interest for the loans that they let out the door and charge a premium on top of the prime lending rate. So the government has to pay back the money, and they have to pay those interest rates. That's all true, but yeah. Then, of course, everything I've half learned, you've probably learned it fully, about modern monetary theory that we've had explained to us, and fiat currency. I don't know that it stands to reason to be saying, well, if the rate is 4.5%, if it was lowered to 4%, would the United States save trillions of dollars? I mean, we cycle through, and the United States government cycles through so much money and from so many sides in this transaction, it's not entirely clear if it's costing anybody anything. But regardless, even if it was, and you wanted to lower that number, lowering it to like 1% is presumably not something that the Federal Reserve would agree is a wise thing to do. It would lower the cost of money, that's for sure. Why isn't the cost of money that low now? Fighting inflation. Well, that's covered because in my note I said no inflation. So I want you to, lower it by a lot, but also have no inflation. And I think that the economists, the problem with them is that they're like, that is not a thing that you can do. Like, you squeeze the balloon on one side, it inflates on the other side. It's just, where does all this air go? There's cross pressures that don't get erased just because you said erase them in your note by a lot. Anyway, where were we with this? Right, so he has set the prerequisite. The first time I get to name somebody for chair, or really add them to the board at all, will be January. I'll be able to name a new chair maybe next May. Powell could stay on until 2028 somehow. I guess there's a transition period. Anyway, he says my prerequisite is someone, whoever I hire, has to be willing to lower interest rates, which means that the Fed isn't independent anymore. The president's note to Mr. Powell on Monday promoted savings of, quote, hundreds of billions of dollars if the Fed lowered interest rates. Republicans are trying to pass a sweeping tax and spending bill that is poised to raise the federal deficit sharply, which would force the government to earmark more money to cover interest payments on the debt. Mr. Trump has called for as much as a 2.5 percentage point reduction in interest rates, well below the level of 4.25% to 4.5% that has been in place since January. So slashing rates more than in half, I think, is what he's advocating here. And I'll tell you what it would do is it changes, well, I guess if the CBO scoring types, and I guess OMB is probably doing their own scoring and may or may not be using math to do it. But I guess the quants would look at it and say, all right, if it's going to add X number of dollars to the deficit, we got to start calculating the cost of maintaining of that debt, servicing that debt. And of course, the cost of servicing that debt is higher at 4.5% than it would be at 2 or 1.5%, like he's pointing to with the chart. It would be. And I think that the trick that they're looking for here is, well, instead of having the CBO say that this bill will add $3 trillion to the debt, I'd rather that we were able to say it will add $1 trillion to the debt. But what if why not just say it'll lower the debt? I mean, you could try that. The math won't be what allows you to do that, but you could just try it. Anyway, but I guess the idea is an accounting one. It ostensibly lowers the price tag of this bill while he's in the middle of the rush to pass it, but he does not make that connection. I ran out of room. I wrote too big. Powell, lower it by a lot. If I hadn't said by a lot, I would have had a room to explain. But now I'm stuck. All right, just do it by a lot. After lowering borrowing costs by a full percentage point, last year, the Fed has stuck to a wait-and-see approach, usually Trump's favorite. We'll see what happens on further cuts, amid uncertainty about how the economy will respond to Mr. Trump's policies, including tariffs. So the bankers are being careful. That's stupid. Give me money. I mean, that's essentially what it comes down to. Is he thinks he's talking to Deutsche Bank, and they're like, we can't risk any more on you. We don't know what the F you're doing, and neither do you. Who cares? Lend me money. One of the president's biggest gripes is toilets, and the other is shower heads. But the one they're talking about is that other countries have continued to lower interest rates as the Fed has stood pat. His note to Mr. Powell was written on a piece of paper ranking the interest rates set by other countries from lowest to highest. And whoever gave it to him knew exactly what they were doing, of course, and highlighted what they wanted him to see. But essentially they, brought him a prop and encouraged him to scribble a note on it. And why don't we use this to frighten Powell and threaten him and tell him what we want him to do. So there it was. They brought in this thing for the express purpose of scribbling something on it. As the attacks on Mr. Powell continued, he was in Sintra, Portugal, which looks a lot like Sinatra if you're used to reading the name, but it's Sintra. No A in between the N and T. Sintra, Portugal. Why? Meeting with other global central bankers, of course. That's what you do in Portugal. At a dinner on Monday to mark the start of the European Central Bank's annual conference there, Christine Lagarde, the president of the bank, the European Central Bank, took a moment to recognize Mr. Powell. That is to say, call him out. Welcome, here he is. Not like, well, who are you again? Oh, yeah, right. It took me a moment to recognize you. He, quote, epitomizes the standard of the courageous central banker. I don't know. That's what she said. Adding that Mr. Powell deserved the room's applause as a please clap moment. She thanked two other long-serving European policymakers, and then the room gave a standing ovation. On Tuesday, Mr. Powell is scheduled to speak on a panel, that's today, at this conference. In addition to Ms. Lagarde, other participants include Andrew Bailey of the Bank of England. I guess that's actually the end of the sentence. Well, all right, there you go. Mr. Trump has routinely pointed to the European Central Bank, which has cut rates 8 times over the past year. Not 9 times, but 8 times, when criticizing Mr. Powell. The Bank of England has also cut rates over the past year, but kept borrowing costs steady at its most recent meeting in June. So other countries, some are lowering the rates, some are standing pat. But I don't know. The main point I think to take away here is, once again, meddling in things that he's not supposed to meddle in, and changing the nature of the relationship between the White House and the Federal Reserve if he can get away with it. And we're just sort of stuck reporting, oh yeah, by the way, the independence of America's central banking system might be in peril, and there may be nothing we can do about it. And nobody's really sure what the impact on the economy is going to be. But at the same time, I don't know. There's a couple other economic news articles out there floating around which basically say, oh, yeah, no, the performance of the dollar vis-a-vis other foreign currencies is at its lowest point. I think somebody said since 1973, making kind of maybe a Nixon allusion there of some sort. And it just occurred to me that, so many people are saying the dollar's status as the international trading currency is threatened by, it's now, I guess, worries about its stability and the tariff situation, and nobody wants to trade in dollars as a result because they want to do less trade with the United States because of the tariff situation. Many, many different cross currents here threatening the status of the dollar, and ordinarily something that U.S. presidents obsess about, but somehow this president is not obsessed about it. And I wonder how much of that is driven by, one, I don't understand anything anyway, or two, It doesn't matter. If the dollar disappears tomorrow, I have Trump coin. I'll just pay for everything. When I want to buy Twinkies or hamburgers, I'll do it with crypto. Everyone loves the crypto. And you can just put it right in the machines, and out comes the soda, just like normal. Anyway, my Diet Coke button is free. So I don't know whether that drives any of it or whether that's something he actually believes, but I would not be surprised to find out that that was the case. All right. Speaking of money, let's pretend we've been speaking of money and move on to this next story, which is about another figure in Trump world stealing money. Not Trump, but maybe just as bad. It's Kristi Noem stealing money. I don't know if she's investing it in costumes or reconstructive surgeries or what, but I think dentistry, at least once, was where the money went. Kristi Noem, according to ProPublica, secretly took a cut of political donations. What do you know? And illustrated by a photo of her riding around with an American flag at what is presumably a rodeo. She's got a cowboy hat on and a cowboy style everything else as well, and is riding around on a horse with a flag. Justin Elliott, Joshua Kaplan, and Alex Mirjeski have provided us with this report just yesterday. The subheader tells us that a dark money group paid $80,000 to Noem's personal company when she was governor of South Dakota, which, by the way, she didn't tell anybody in South Dakota about. I'm your governor, but did you know I secretly own a private company that's getting paid by my political operation? She did not include this income on her federal disclosure forms, a likely violation of ethics requirements, experts say. And later on in the article, I think we find out also a violation of South Dakota law, if there is one. In 2023, while Kristi Noem was governor of South Dakota, she supplemented her income, by secretly accepting a cut of the money she raised for a nonprofit. Dramatic music. And you might be saying to yourself, how low can you go? Stealing money she raised for a nonprofit. Now hold your horses, and there's a horse here right in this photo that you can hold. It's not yours, but I imagine she would allow you to hold the horse if it was time for her to get off. The nonprofit doesn't help anybody. It's a nonprofit that promotes her political career, tax records show. I mean, that's the tax records show that she took the money, not that, they're not meant to just teach you what the nonprofit does. But the nonprofit is useless to everybody except her anyway. So there is that. So there are many levels to this scam here. One, a nonprofit that promotes her political career. First of all, that's not supposed to be tax exempt. Second of all, who needs a nonprofit to promote Kristi Noem's anything? But that's what is it? It's a conduit for funneling money that was raised in a what should be a non-tax exempt environment, converted into tax exempt money, and then converted into her personal spending account. In what experts described as a highly unusual arrangement, the nonprofit routed funds to a personal company of Noem's that had recently been established in Delaware. Dun, dun, dun. Now, there's nothing necessarily nefarious about forming your company in Delaware, except she's the governor of South Dakota. Why isn't the company formed in South Dakota? South Dakota, not an unattractive incorporating state, as I understand it. But if you're the governor of it, people might look and find out what's been incorporated in this state lately, and not so much in Delaware. But many layers of what's going on here. One, forming a thing to promote your own political career, but outside of a PAC, Kristi Noem PAC, or a leadership PAC, or a campaign fund, or anything like that. Imagine a nonprofit, helping the world one Kristi Noem at a time. What are you doing this for? Why incorporate it in Delaware? All right, more on the scheme here. The payment totaled $80,000 that year. And again, important to know. So she raises money for a nonprofit. We're having a fundraiser for the Kristi Noem Fund. It's meant to promote my political career. So, okay, that's a workaround and a loophole anyway. But one, it's just a PAC and it's not tax exempt and people don't get a tax deduction for giving money to something like that. But instead they say, well, it's not spending directly on any campaigns. It's just whatever. It promotes the idea that world peace will ensue if Kristi Noem is in charge. And we just take out ads that say that, but not that she should be elected to anything in particular. That's the loophole. So it's enough. People should give money to that, and she winks and nods and takes down the name and says, I owe you a favor, right? But the problem with that is, I can't eat it, says Kristi Noem. I can't use it for cosmetic surgery. I can't buy clothes with that money because I have to spend it on telling people I'm a good person. Isn't there some way that I can take that money and use it to go shopping? And the answer is yes, you can funnel it to yourself by saying, one of the ways that this nonprofit will promote my political career is by paying we'll hire somebody to do a thing that is in pursuit of the idea that Kristi Noem is great. I don't know what that thing will be, but we'll definitely pay for that. What company should we hire? And the answer is, we'll hire a company called Kristi Noem in Disguise, LLC. And it, too, will be incorporated in Delaware, so no one will find out about it. And what will they do? I don't effing care. We'll just pay them to do it. And if it turns out they suck and our shareholders want to sue, fine, because there's no shareholders. Ha ha. The end. And that's the amount. That's the scheme. And so Kristi Noem will then say, I got $80,000 to do a thing for my nonprofit. But I'm not going to do that thing, and the nonprofit is not going to get mad at me for not doing that thing because I am that nonprofit. And I am the company that the nonprofit pays, so nobody's going to file a complaint. And even if they do, I will find that it is perfectly good. And in my business judgment, I have given myself money for good reason. And that's what it comes right down to. Now, here's the details that make it sound like it's a legitimate-ish sort of thing, even though very clearly it's being presented as not, because it isn't. It's ProPublica telling the truth, but it's more complicated than it needs to be. In what experts described as a highly unusual arrangement, the nonprofit routed funds to a personal company of Noem's that had recently been established in Delaware. The payment totaled $80,000 that year, a significant boost to her roughly, how much does she get for being governor of South Dakota? Anyone want to guess? It's $130,000 a year to be governor of South Dakota. I think that makes a certain amount of sense. $80,000 is a pretty significant chunk above and beyond $130,000. It's a big raise. Since the nonprofit is a so-called dark money group, one that's not required to disclose the names of its donors, the original source of the money remains unknown. That too gets dramatic music. Noem then, if that's not worrying you, Noem then failed to disclose that $80,000 payment to the public. Well, that's just illegal. After President Donald Trump selected Noem to be his Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, she had to, well, quote unquote had to, release a detailed accounting of her assets and sources of income from 2023 on. But guess what she didn't do? She did not include that income from the dark money group on her disclosure form, which experts called a likely violation of federal ethics requirements. Well, yes. That's why I was saying she quote-unquote had to, right? You have to release the details accounting all of your assets from 2023 on. Would it be all right if I released part of the details? No. You have to release all of them. And when I say have to, I mean really should. Okay, well, what if I just don't? Well, okay, I'm not going to. And then we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens. Well, you didn't follow the directions. That may be a violation of the effing directions. Maybe you think it is. I think it is by definition. But you know how experts have to treat it. Likely a violation of federal ethics requirements. Experts told ProPublica it was troubling. The expert is Susan Collins. Troubling that Noem was personally taking money that came from political donors. Unless, of course, she wants to be on the Supreme Court, in which case, what are you going to do? In a filing, the group, a nonprofit called American Resolve Policy Fund. Okay, that's the name of her nonprofit group. The American Resolve Policy Fund. What does it do? It promotes Kristi Noem. Why? I don't know. So they do. Well, they describe the $80,000 payment as payment for fundraising. No, you might have thought that the American Resolve Policy Fund raises funds to promote Kristi Noem. And it does, but it asks for help in doing that. And one of the people that asked for help was Kristi Noem. Isn't that amazing? Kristi Noem, purely out of the goodness of her heart, went out of her way to raise money for Kristi Noem, but in a non-profit setting, such that they could incorporate in Delaware and then give that money, the non-profit money, to Kristi Noem. Well, it did promote Kristi Noem. It made her richer than she was before, and as a Republican candidate for office, that is extremely important. People will vote for you if you're richer. That was the theory. So that is really something. So you might expect Kristi Noem to understand that part of the game here is if you want to run for office, you're going to have to raise money. And that's part of your job. So if you go out and raise money, then we'll use the money to promote your candidacy. But instead, well, now she's no longer a candidate for anything. She's just going to serve in the Trump administration. So I guess instead they said, thank you for helping us raise all that money. Here's a payment to you for doing the work of raising the money for yourself. You keep this money, and the rest of the money that we're not giving to you personally will be used to promote you. So it's win-win, you could say. So how do you like that? She got paid to raise money for herself. It wasn't enough that she raised the money for herself. She also got paid for doing it. The organization said Noem had brought in hundreds of thousands of dollars, and they only gave her 80 of those thousands of dollars. She's really working on a shoestring budget. Now, there is nothing remarkable about a politician raising money for nonprofits, even when the nonprofit is themselves, and other groups that promote their campaigns or agendas, like super PACs or leadership PACs. What's unusual, experts said, is for that politician to keep some of that money for themselves. If donors to these nonprofits are not just holding the keys to an elected official's political future, but also literally providing them with their income, that's new and disturbing, said Daniel Weiner, a former Federal Election Commission attorney who now leads the Brennan Center's work on campaign finance. It is disturbing. I'll agree with him there. New and disturbing. New in terms of modern American era politicians being willing to just do that kind of straightforwardly, but it's old in terms of why, no one has ever heard about a rich person providing an income to a politician in exchange for favors. That's actually an old problem, and we all know about it. ProPublica discovered details of the payment in the annual tax form of American Reserve Policy Fund, which is part of a network of political groups that promote Noem and her agenda. She's just a simple country farm girl who has a network of political groups that promote her and her agenda and pay her to raise the money to promote her and her agenda, by the way. The nonprofit describes its mission, if you think it has one, as fighting to preserve America for the next generation. It's not doing that. It's robbing it, but okay. There's little evidence in the public domain that the group has done much at all, by the way. In its first year, its main expenditures were paying Noem and covering the cost of some unspecified travel. Whose travel do you think that is? Poor orphans? Starving African children? It also maintains social media accounts devoted to promoting Noem, and that's very costly. You'd have to pay me millions. It has 100 followers on X. So that's pretty good. So, I don't know, $800 per follower, I guess, they gave her. So, is that right, Ethan? Yeah. In a statement, Noem's lawyer, Trevor Stanley, have we ever heard that name? You should look that up, said, then Governor Noem fully complied with the letter and spirit of the law. She did not. And that the Office of Government Ethics, which processes disclosure forms for federal officials, quote, this is great, analyzed and cleared her financial information in regards to this entity, unquote. Stanley did not respond to follow-up questions about whether the ethics office was aware of the $80,000 payment. Well, this was cleared. I mean, you see what he's doing here? This was cleared by the Office of Government Ethics. Well, what was cleared? Our form was cleared. I know, but you didn't say anything on your form about the $80,000. Well, nonetheless, they cleared our form. Yeah, but would they have cleared it if you had declared the money? Well, they would have, actually. They would have cleared the form. You declared the money. Fine. The Office of Government Ethics just basically says, are there any mistakes on this form? They may or may not be in the business of trying to find out whether there are omissions or not. But if they do hear about omissions, then they're not going to clear your form. It's lawyer speak, obviously. And, well, that's what lawyers do. They speak in lawyer speak. I'm just sort of curious about whether or not the name Trevor Stanley is going to bring us any immediate hits that make us say, oh, my God, that guy. Let's see. Trevor Stanley. Not really. Nothing in particular jumps out immediately. But we can search around and see whether there's anything bad. But we can just focus on Kristi Noem and what she's doing here. That's, I think, quite enough. So, yeah, that was an interesting thing. Well, as far as they know, they cleared our form. They just didn't know that we were keeping things secret from them. Stanley also said that, quote, Secretary Noem fully disclosed all of her income. Now, see, that's where we're getting off track. Fully disclosed all of her income on public documents that are readily available. Other ones, not this one. Asked for evidence of that, given that Noem didn't report the $80,000 on her federal financial disclosure form. Stanley did not respond. So I guess maybe she may or may not have paid taxes on that money, or she may have put it on a South Dakota form, but not the federal form. It's not here, but we put it on another one elsewhere, and we just don't. That is some lawyer speak, all right. Alrighty, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We better get moving, actually, now that I think about it. I know, we're enjoying these stories and lingering over them, and that does save some other stories for us to do recording for our absence. But let's get through it here already. So where were we here? Stanley said that Secretary Noem fully disclosed all of her income on public documents that are readily available. Are they readily available? I mean, to some people, like if she disclosed them on our income tax forms, is that a form that's readily available? Well, it's a public document, true, but not readily available. Asked for evidence, goodbye. That's what happened. Before being named Homeland Security Secretary overseeing immigration enforcement, Noem spent 2 decades in South Dakota's government and the U.S. House of Representatives, drawing a public servant's salary. Her husband, Brian Noem, it's Bryon, by the way, runs a small insurance brokerage with 2 offices in the state. Between his company and his real estate holdings, he has at least $2 million in assets, according to Noem's filing. So, hey, for a place with 2 offices in South Dakota, insurance biz, $2 million, not too bad, right? While she is among the least wealthy members of Trump's cabinet, her personal spending habits have attracted notice. Noem was photographed wearing a gold Rolex Cosmograph Daytona watch that cost nearly $50,000 as she toured the Salvadoran prison where her agency is sending immigrants. So that's questionable, certainly. In April, after her purse was stolen, remember this, at a Washington, D.C. restaurant, it emerged that she was carrying $3,000 in cash, which an official said was for dinner, activities, and Easter gifts. She was criticized for using taxpayer money as a governor to pay for expenses related to trips to Paris, to Canada for bear hunting, and to Houston to have dental work done. Which again, other side of the country, just got to go to the dentist. I have a dentist who's very nearby my house. You have a dentist very nearby your house. Maybe it's a 20-minute drive to the dentist for you. Maybe it's a half an hour drive to the dentist. Is it a 2-3 hour flight to the dentist for you? Probably not. How does a governor on $130,000 salary fit in a gold Rolex watch and decide, I got to see a dentist in Houston? And there's specialist dentists out there for specialized work, sure, but usually probably somebody who's, been working in a government job for 20 years is like, that would be great, but I'm not one of the Real Housewives of Houston. I'm the governor of South Dakota. And isn't there a dentist here somewhere in South Dakota? What if I went to the other Dakota? I'll expand my search. I will accept dentists in a 5-state area up here. North Dakota, South Dakota, let's say Montana, Wyoming. Where else would you like to include? Idaho? She's heading west. All right. But not Houston, Texas. I don't know. That seems pretty interesting. And then, of course, also, by the way, I'm going to go to Paris and I'm going to go bear hunting. But I want to do it in Canada because of how patriotic I am. I don't know what that's supposed to be, but it seems like not a $130,000 a year thing. Noem's personal company, the one that got paid, is an LLC called Ashwood Strategies, which, it notes here, shares a name with one of her horses. Girl, stop dreaming about horses. Wake up. Yes, so one of her favorite horses is named Strategies. I assume Ashwood rather than Strategies. It was registered in Delaware, not the horse, though that may be true as well. The company registered in Delaware early in her second term as South Dakota governor around 1 p.m., it says, on June 22nd, 2023. Normally, you wouldn't care. Well, I don't really care that they registered this company at 1 p.m. Why are you telling me that? But like Chekhov's gun, it has a purpose and has to have a purpose. 4 minutes later, the nonprofit American Resolve Policy Fund was incorporated in Delaware, too. What's interesting is the receiving unit for taking the bribe was constituted first. Then later they said, we should create a company that will pay the bribe. Let's get to that. So, American Resolve raised $1.1 million in 2023, according to its tax filing. The group reported that it had 0 employees. And what it did with that money is largely unclear, although 80,000 of it went to Kristi Noem's company, named after her horse, Ashwood Strategies. In 2023, the nonprofit spent only about $220,000 of its war chest, with more than a third of that going to Noem's LLC. The rest went mostly toward administrative expenses, even though they have 0 employees, and a roughly $84,000 travel budget and that, of course, was obviously to pay for, well, we could probably guess. Which one of your 0 employees did you pay for travel for? Oh, well, that would have to be 0. So you paid for travel by a non-employee. Yes, that can happen. Who would that non-employee be? Well, in all likelihood, it's going to be Kristi Noem. I mean, come on. So, anyway, $84,000 travel budget. It's not clear whose travel the group paid for. But they spent $220,000. $80,000 of it went into Kristi Noem's pocket, and $84,000 of it went through Kristi Noem's pocket to pay. Well, it didn't go through her pocket. It was paying for her to travel somewhere. Paris? Bear hunting in Canada? To Houston for dentistry? Yes, and more, I'm sure. So really, $164,000 of the $220,000 it spent went either to Kristi Noem's pocket or to fly her pockets around the country with Kristi Noem attached to them. The nonprofit reported that it sent $80,000, the $80,000 fundraising fee to Noem's LLC as payment for bringing in $800,000, a 10% cut. A professional fundraiser who also raised money for the group, by the way, was paid a lower rate of 7% because she sucks. She's terrible, whereas Kristi Noem is a great professional fundraiser. So there you go. They raised, what did they say? $1.1 million. $800,000 of it is claimed Kristi Noem raised herself. Why did she raise it? She raised it for herself, to promote herself, and as a pat on the head for doing the hard work of raising money for yourself, and it is hard work. Here is 10% of it to keep for yourself, because it not only promotes yourself, it pays yourself. But also another 7% went to somebody else. In the intervening years, American Resolve has maintained a low public profile. In March, it purchased Facebook ads attacking a local news outlet in South Dakota. So, by the way, just in case you were keeping score there in South Dakota, what did Kristi Noem do with the money she raised? She used it to attack a South Dakota business. But it was a business that said bad things about her, you see. They reported on Noem's use of government credit cards, and she didn't like that. So she used the money she raised to attack them on Facebook ads. Noem's lawyer did not answer questions about whether the group paid her more money after 2023, the most recent year for which its tax filings are available. And the answer is probably yes, but those documents are not readily publicly available yet. And so therefore I don't have to answer any questions about them because you can't prove I'm lying. The nonprofit has an affiliated political committee, which is not nonprofit, I guess, because it's a political committee. American Resolve PAC. That has been more active, at least in public. What's it been doing? Well, you'll never guess. Touting Noem's conservative leadership under a picture of her staring off into the sky. Its website said the PAC was created to put, quote, Kristi and her team on the ground in key races across America. In other words, it pays for her travel, which is interesting because she's already having her travel paid for by the nonprofit arm of this thing. Noem traveled the country last year attending events the PAC sponsored in support of Republican candidates. So what happens there? If I'm going to Idaho or New Hampshire to support a candidate, my PAC pays for it. If I'm going to hunt bears in Canada, and if you're wondering why would they do this, if I'm going to hunt bears in Canada and take pictures of myself holding rifles and maybe a bear head or something like that will make people think I'm a tough, salt of the earth type personage, that will be paid for by the nonprofit. If I'm doing it for another candidate, it'll be paid for by the PAC. American Resolve's treasurer referred question to Noem's lawyer. In his statement, Noem's lawyer said she, quote, did not establish, finance, maintain, or control American Resolve Fund. She was simply a vendor for a non-profit entity, which has no employees. While Noem failed to report the fundraising income Ashwood Strategies received on her federal financial disclosure, she did provide some other details. She described the LLC as involving, quote, personal activities outside my official gubernatorial capacity, and noted that it received the $140,000 advance for her book, No Going Back. No going back on telling everybody that you shot your puppy, right? The LLC also had a bank account with between $100,000 and $250,000 in it, and at least $50,000 of livestock and equipment, she reported, which is interesting too. The cow's not going anywhere. Maybe it's the cow's travel they were paying for. Livestock and equipment. Well, I guess they needed some on her land, and rather than pay for it as Kristi Noem and her husband Brian by going to the store and using their money or credit cards, they had the nonprofit pay for it because it promotes America. The fact that Ashwood Strategies is Noem's company only emerged through the confirmation process for her Trump cabinet post, by the way. South Dakota has minimal disclosure rules for elected officials, and Noem had not previously divulged that she had created a side business while she was governor. Noem's outside income may have run afoul of South Dakota law. They have a couple of them there. According to Lee Schoenbeck, a veteran Republican politician and attorney who was, until recently, the head of the state Senate. The law requires top officials, including the governor, to devote their full time to their official roles. There's no way the governor is supposed to have a private side business that the public doesn't know about, Schoenbeck told ProPublica. It would clearly not be appropriate. Noem's lawyer said South Dakota law allowed her to receive income from the nonprofit. Period. End of sentence. End of article. How do you like that? Sounds like there could be more work done on that one. Not that it's going to make any difference in the Trump corruption atmosphere, but it's just a thing to keep an eye on. And extra reason to, well, you'll understand better why your stomach turns every time you see her. If it wasn't policy-based, now it can be the fact that she's a thief. So, why not? Concentrate on that. All right, what will be our next addition to today's show? Well, golly, there are so many. We didn't get all the way through the New York Times telling of the deal between Trump and Bukele in El Salvador about involving MS-13, that terrorist gang organization for which, remember, they're deporting Kilmar Abrego Garcia because he had tattoos on his fingers that don't say MS-13, but they are pretty sure that they were wink wink and actually meant MS-13, even though they didn't. And the ideas were stupid as to what the connection was. But they were such bad, horrible, no good, everyday terrorists that Abrego Garcia, well, you simply had to assume, for the sake of argument, that the weird tattoos he had on his fingers meant, I hate America and I want to murder everybody in it. And so they deported him because that's how bad MS-13 is. Except some or all of the top leadership of MS-13 who are, for some reason, being palled around with and released from prison. So we began reading this story yesterday, and maybe we should start over / try again, or try and find out where we left off. Again, this New York Times piece, Trump vowed to dismantle MS-13. His deal with Bukele threatens that effort. In fact, undoes that effort entirely. Top gang leaders being sent back to El Salvador were part of a lengthy federal investigation that has amassed evidence of a corrupt pact between the Bukele government and MS-13. And I don't think we were even clear by the time we stopped in all this whether these guys were being freed, whether they're being freed in America, whether they're being freed in El Salvador, whether they're remaining in prison in El Salvador, but just under, ludicrous conditions that either are slightly better than the rest of the inmates or maybe didn't resemble being in prison at all. We don't know. Everything's pretty secret. And once again, just to credit the people working on all this, Alan Feuer, Maria Abi Habib, Zolan Kano-Youngs, Annie Corial, William K. Rashbaum, and Devlin Barrett, putting together this enormous article yesterday. Just as a reminder, they call out at first one of the top leaders of MS-13, Vladimir, interesting name, Vladimir Arevalo Chavez, and that even among the brutal ranks of MS-13, he stands out as a highly effective manager of murder. Prosecutors say the guy known as Vampiro, right, and had overseen killings in at least 3 countries that they could prove: migrants in Mexico, rivals in El Salvador, and his own compatriots in the United States as well. Arrested in February 2023, claimed as a major triumph for American investigators who only months earlier had accused him and 12 other gang leaders of terrorism, in addition to bloodshed and corruption, in a wide-ranging federal indictment on Long Island. And remember, they're very anti-immigration and xenophobic Republicans out there in Long Island. They want MS-13 leaders behind bars. Unless, of course, they don't. Or Daddy Trump doesn't, in which case, Forget everything, including the murder of our children. Anyway, this April, prosecutors who brought those charges suddenly and quietly asked a federal judge to drop them, citing national security concerns. National security, that too came up yesterday. We need to get back to that story. They said they needed to return Mr. Arevalo to El Salvador, his homeland. The surprising reversal came shortly after a deal the Trump administration struck with Nayib Bukele, El Salvador's president, who agreed to accept more than 200 migrants expelled from the United States into a prison he built for terrorists. The United States paid El Salvador millions of dollars to help Trump carry out his deportation agenda, adding an important sweetener at Mr. Bukele's request, the return of key MS-13 leaders to who were in American custody. Officials from both countries have said the gang leaders are being sent back to face justice. That's what you would say, so that you don't get in trouble. But the Trump administration has not acknowledged another reason Mr. Bukele would want them back. Prosecutors in the United States have amassed substantial evidence of a corrupt pact between the Salvadoran government and some high-ranking MS-13 leaders, who they say agreed to drive down violence and bolster Mr. Bukele politically in exchange for cash and perks in jail. A New York Times investigation found the deal with El Salvador, heralded by Mr. Trump as a crackdown on crime, is actually undermining a long-standing U.S. inquiry into the gang. According to multiple people with knowledge of the initiative, 2 major ongoing cases against some of the gang's highest-ranking leaders could be badly damaged, and other defendants could be less likely to cooperate or testify in court, they said. The deal has also undercut Trump's own repeated pledges to dismantle MS-13, obliterate MS-13, a central plank of his tough-on-crime brand. Earlier this year, Attorney General Pam Bondi issued an internal memo calling for the total elimination of the gang, by which we mean converting them into respectable businessmen and shipping them back to El Salvador to take their places in the government there, or something like that. Which the White House has, of course, the gang, which the White House has designated a foreign terrorist organization, except who cares about that? In his first term, Mr. Trump established a group of prosecutors and investigators known as Task Force Vulcan. They're going to give you the Vulcan neck pinch and send you to El Salvador. This group brought expansive cases against the gang's leadership until Trump found out how much money he might be able to siphon off from the system by not treating them as criminals, but as honored guests instead, I guess. Anyway, some who were part of that effort are now alarmed by the deal with Mr. Bukele and worry that he wants the gang leaders back to prevent them from revealing damaging information about his government. The Times investigation found the U.S. officials have had strong indications for years of the troubling relationship between the Bukele administration and MS-13 and its leaders, and had begun scrutinizing Mr. Bukele himself. Stop doing that, Trump will eventually say. The findings are based on government documents and interviews with more than 30 people who have knowledge of the Vulcan inquiry or the U.S.-El Salvador relationship, many of whom spoke on condition of anonymity, if you can believe it. Here's what they had to say. The first Trump administration received a warning about the secret pact as early as August of 2020 from a top Salvadoran official who showed up at the U.S. Embassy in San Salvador to share that information. The following year, the Treasury Department imposed sanctions on the same official and another top Bukele aide after determining they had offered MS-13 leaders money, mobile phones, and prostitutes in jail in exchange for their help bringing down the homicide rate and securing votes. Federal investigators were examining whether some U.S. aid provided to El Salvador was being illicitly funneled to benefit MS-13, not Bukele, but MS-13, which would be amazing. At one point, a gang leader ordered the assassination of an FBI agent working on the case in El Salvador. You know why? To stop the investigation. And this agent and his family had to leave the country. Federal investigators had begun looking at Mr. Bukele's activities, taking steps to request a review of his bank records to examine possible misappropriation of U.S. funds. According to Christopher Musto, a task force member at the time, ProPublica previously reported some aspects of this case, including the focus on Bukele. It was groundbreaking, we read this, Mr. Musto said of the Vulcan investigation, noting that some agents risked their lives to help track down and detain MS-13 leaders. We went through a lot to do it. While he broadly supports Trump's deportation of gang members, Musto said it was striking to see him host Mr. Bukele at the White House to celebrate their deal. He's dirty, or he was dirty, it says. Mr. Musto said of the Salvadoran president, he was corrupt, and now he's sitting next to the president in the Oval Office, and he's got prime access to the leader of the free world. Yeah, you bet, him and every other criminal in the world. Mr. Bukele has repeatedly denied that there was a pact between his government and gang leaders. Salvadoran officials did not respond to requests for comment. Abigail Jackson, White House spokeswoman, said in a statement that, remember, this is all crap. Any suggestion that President Trump isn't successfully eradicating terrorist criminal gangs from the United States is just plain stupid. She said the administration was grateful for President Bukele's partnership and the use of his maximum security prison, adding there's no better place for these sick illegal criminals. A Justice Department spokesperson said in a statement that the agency was focused on making America safe again, yada yada, which includes ending the invasion of violent, illegal, criminal aliens, or not stopping it and sending them back with privileges. A spokesperson for the U.S. Attorney's Office of the Eastern District of New York, which brought 2 MS-13 leadership cases, declined to comment. It remains unclear how many MS-13 leaders the Trump administration has sent back to El Salvador so far, or how many more it plans to return. At least one of them, we definitely got to this part too. Should we, is there a subheader where we started? I think we got through all of this. And let's see, there was another mention of another leader, Cesar Lopez Larios, put on a plane to El Salvador in March with other migrants sent to the maximum security prison. Lopez had been in U.S. custody for less than a year, awaiting trial in Long Island on narco-terrorism conspiracy charges. Lawyers for this guy, who remains in federal custody after pleading not guilty, have been trying to prevent him from facing a similar fate. Oh, that was Arevalo, the Vampiro guy. Who they're trying to prevent him from facing a similar fate. In a recent letter to the judge overseeing the case, they argued that the Trump administration had made a corrupt deal to send defendants in the case back to be silenced by the Bukele administration. Okay. That is a little confusing. Is it Arevalo? He doesn't want to go. Well, that's interesting. Or at least he's playing at not wanting to go. Maybe that's just good cover. The government's sudden reversal troubles Richard Lochner, the former principal of Brentwood Ross High School on Long Island, where nearly a decade ago, 2 of his students were murdered by MS-13 members. He's not happy about that. Those were heinous acts, and I just hope, my God, that these men who are behind them, the masterminds, serve time wherever it may be. I would be very unhappy if they dropped all charges here and flew them back to El Salvador and they were just set free. That would be devastating. Oh no. I wonder if that's what we'll find out happens in the end. The next section here, dismantle, decimate, and eradicate. That was the platform. Anyway, the spasm of violence committed by MS-13 on Long Island caught Mr. Trump's attention during his first term. In July of 2017, he delivered a speech in Ronkonkoma, calling the gang members animals, and asserting that the policy of his administration was to dismantle, decimate, and eradicate the group. He was able to read that back then, which was started by Central American immigrants in Los Angeles in the 1980s before morphing into an international syndicate. It didn't even start in El Salvador. The next year, he invited the mother of one of Mr. Lochner's slain students to attend his State of the Union address, telling those watching that the girls had been murdered, quote, by members of the savage MS-13 gang. He brought her to the State of the Union, trotted her out, and then trotted out her daughter's corpse to make the claim that he was going to fight to put these guys away. And a few short years later, he's setting them free, palling around with terrorists. Oh, no, I can't believe that every accusation is a confession with these guys. In August of 2019, his attorney general, then was William P. Barr, of course, created a special unit targeting MS-13. Joint Task Force Vulcan was asked to hunt down and prosecute not just the gang's minions on the streets of American cities, but also its top leaders overseas. The man selected to oversee Vulcan was a scion of a Justice Department stalwart. That's a lot. Not a scion himself. Well, he was the scion of a stalwart, not a stalwart himself. It was John Durham, the son This is John J. Durham, the son of John H. Durham, the longtime federal prosecutor and ally of Mr. Barr, best known for having investigated the investigators who scrutinized connections between Russia and Mr. Trump's 2016 campaign. So remember the failed Durham investigation that went nowhere to prove that Russia was a hoax? Well, while we were doing that, we were also paying his son to totally investigate MS-13 but not do anything about it in the end. Bespectacled like his father, but without the imposing beard. Would you say that Durham's beard was imposing? All right. The younger Mr. Durham quickly developed a reputation for probity and relentlessness. That's nice. Working from his base in the federal prosecutor's office in Long Island. Time for music. He was placed in charge of a team that drew on the resources of the FBI, the DEA, the Homeland Security Investigations, okay, whatever, and at least 10 U.S. attorneys' offices across the country in MS-13 hotspots. By the following year, the team had received a big tip. And the tip was, stop prosecuting people. You're going to release them in the end anyway. Now, he really thought he was doing something, I bet. Oh, well.
Sup, fam? It's your boy Darwin, a.k.a. Darwin_Darko, a.k.a. the most reasonable man in America, a.k.a. KITM's senior black correspondent. You might remember me from such recordings as Spacemen vs. Space Cadets and We Need to Talk About Joe Biden. Today, I want to bring you good news about that thing you've been struggling with. Do you suffer from giving too much of a damn? Do you turn on the series of tubes and find yourself outraged at the particular way some news organization strung some sentences together only to realize, nope, this is not some fictional hellscape? Well, guess what? You no longer have to accept the life of giving too much of a damn. You can do something about it, because even you, yes you, can be a show contributor. Now I know what you're thinking. Hey, Mr. Most Reasonable Man in America, I'm not some professional podcast talking guy. Don't worry about it. Do you have a smartphone or some other electronic recording device? Well, that's all you need. You too can have a segment where you can read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Fair warning though, side effects may include general punditry, having opinions and hot takes, getting stuff off your chest, and hearing your own voice. If your recording lasts longer than 5 to 7 minutes, please consult kagrox@gmail.com. That's KAGROX@gmail.com.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's continue. Might as well try and knock out as much of this as we can. I hope we can wrap it up. We only have the one segment left. I know, and we've lingered over every story, and I gotta press on. The next section has arrived here. It's called The Pact, and the piece is now illustrated by a photo, the caption of which tells us that we're looking at the people are really naming their kids Osiris, huh? Osiris, which I guess they say Osiris Luna Meza, a top Bukele aide who ran the Salvadoran prison system, I guess is the guy speaking here. It's interesting though, he's speaking in a, I don't know, a black t-shirt and whatever, but he's wearing like latex gloves while he's giving the statement. I'm not certain what that's supposed to mean, but he's backed by a couple of, I only see two in the photo, guards, maybe from the prison system, who are masked in the same way that now our ICE goons are masked. And I think that's really interesting that we stole that practice from El Salvador. I mean, many places where they're doing that, but we've seen it most directly. As soon as we started housing people in their Supermax prison, we started seeing that ICE goons masking up in the same way. And one of them has the skull face mask, which, just really adds to it. Now, it's interesting, too, because, the skull suggests, death, of course, but a certain level of emaciation. And let's say the guard himself, what's visible of him, not emaciated. All right? Anyway, here is Osiris Luna Meza speaking here. He's, again, ran the prison system for Bukele, confessed his, quote, discomfort at the government's interactions with MS-13 during a meeting with diplomats at the United States Embassy in San Salvador, according to the State Department cable reviewed by the New York Times. So I guess he's in on it, but he came and spoke out about it. And yet he is also involved in it. And so, he may get swept up in the charges. It may be that he arranges a deal for himself in the end by having revealed it to the United States, except the United States is no longer prosecuting that deal as corrupt, but rather celebrating it as policy. So it may turn out that Mr. Whistleblower here ends up being hung out to dry. Now, why he's here in latex gloves and I mentioned that he's backed by the guards. They are wearing those latex gloves, as they often do, because they usually are busy beating up prisoners and they don't want them to bleed all over them. Why he unmasked and giving a speech is wearing those gloves, I'm not really sure. But I guess that's part of the tactical look that they're going for down there in El Salvador. Personally, I think it looks like you're about to perform a cavity search, and maybe that's something you don't want to remind people that you do. I don't know that that's, super manly for you. Anyway, maybe they think it is. And I guess it's in keeping with their toxic masculinity type reputation. We will sexually violate you. That's part of their scariness. And I guess, it could go either way, but they're trying to push it as, that's what makes us tough and cool. I don't buy it, but okay. Twice in August of 2020, we're told, and now that we're talking about the pact, an unusual guest, and he is unusual, he wears latex gloves, with a startling secret, visited the United States Embassy in San Salvador. His name was, of course, I told you already, Osiris, among other parts of his name. The last name, Luna Meza, M-E-Z-A. Osiris was a top Bukele aide who ran the Salvadoran prison system. Although Mr. Bukele had long denied having corrupt ties with his country's gangs, Mr. Luna, one of Mr. Bukele's closest confidants, told U.S. diplomats that just such a pact existed between the Salvadoran government and MS-13, according to a State Department cable reviewed by the Times. Not terribly surprising. There's lots of warlords around. I mean, that's kind of the way things were for many hundreds of years. Not supposed to be in the modern era, but hey, we don't all have such good luck with our governments, and we may be finding out how easy it is to have that happen here. Confessing his discomfort at the government's interactions with the gang, the September 10th, 2020 cable said Mr. Luna he's expressed his discomfort, the cable said. Mr. Luna showed officials at the embassy a security camera screenshot of several masked men entering one of the prisons he oversaw. One of the men, he said, was a senior MS-13 leader wanted by Salvadoran authorities. That is interesting. So usually now we're now conditioned to seeing these masked guys and saying, oh gosh, they're ICE agents. Of course, a lot of us suspect that they're not ICE agents per se, but in fact, Proud Boys just sort of doing this as a hobby for the bounties. That's a possibility. But now we have to entertain the possibility that some of the masked guys seen in Los Angeles and elsewhere around the country, what if they're MS-13 members and they're masking because they don't want to be identified as having a pact with the United States government? But we're asking them, you grab people off the streets and threaten them in order to improve your muscle and power so that we can leverage it on our behalf later on. I don't know. You don't know. That's the problem with a masked, quote-unquote, police force. They could be police. They could be nobody. They could be criminals. They could be criminals disguising themselves as police for fun and doing it hoping they don't get discovered. They could be disguising themselves as police with semi or quasi-official sanction to actually do policing functions as opposed to just freelancing it and beating up rival gang members or people that they suspect might sympathize with rival gangs. It could get pretty dirty pretty quickly. Anyway, one of the men, it was said, was a senior MS-13 leader wanted by Salvadoran authorities. Mr. Luna acknowledged that he had personally brought him into the facility to meet with some of his jailed colleagues, though he disavowed knowing anything about their conversations. But should you be doing that? You should not. The reason you're in jail is to keep you from doing those things. Embassy officials were uncertain what to do with the information, according to the cable, because they believed that Mr. Luna, who had a reputation for corruption, was probably downplaying his own involvement. The officials were also skeptical because he had made a big request: asylum in the United States. What do we think the next administration would say to that? With, by the way, not just asylum in the United States, let me go in, with luxurious accommodations, of course, in exchange for testifying against the Bukele government. Still, much of what Mr. Luna revealed at the embassy made its way to Mr. Durham, the younger, and his Vulcan investigators. That's really funny. The investigators themselves are not Vulcans, but they are on Team Vulcan, as you know, according to 3 people familiar with the matter. Then, shortly after his visit, the Salvadoran news outlet El Faro published a lengthy investigation describing the pact between the Bukele administration and MS-13. That's pretty brave. Within months, Vulcan issued its first significant indictment against the highest reaches of MS-13's leadership. In December 2020, prosecutors charged 14 men, including 10 who were part of the gang's founding cadre, the 12 Apostles of the Devil. Ooh, the devil. Well, again, this is December 2020. They're getting ready for the insurrection at the Capitol, of course, but this is the Trump administration doing this. The indictment was unsealed on January 14th, 2021, less than a week before Mr. Trump's successor, Joe Biden, was inaugurated. The charging document revealed, among other acts of violence, that MS-13 had sought the murder of an FBI agent. The agent had been assigned to El Salvador as part of the anti-gang task force, helping Vulcan gather intelligence when the hit was put out on him. According to 3 people with knowledge of the case, he and his family had to be rushed out of the country. That was back when the first Trump administration, cared about the lives of FBI agents, but now they don't. They were later, of course, in insurrection against the United States government, and they've stayed that way ever since. The indictment also had a section titled Political Influence in El Salvador, which laid out how MS-13 leaders had helped secure votes for the party that governed El Salvador before Mr. Bukele took over in exchange for cash and other perks. The indictment said nothing about Mr. Bukele, who had assumed the presidency in June of 2019. Mr. Luna, or the illicit... didn't say anything... Okay, the report said nothing about Bukele, Mr. Luna, or the illicit prison visits. Interesting. There was only a tantalizing reference to how MS-13 had, quote, continued to negotiate with political parties in El Salvador and to use its control of the level of violence to influence actions of the government. Next section, Pick Our Battles, is what it's called. As Vulcan's work proceeded, the Biden administration went public with what it knew about the relationship between the Bukele government and MS-13. I don't remember it, but they say they did. In December of 2021, the Treasury Department imposed sanctions on Mr. Luna and another top Salvadoran official, Carlos Marroquin Chica, after finding that the men had not merely facilitated prison meetings with MS-13 members after Mr. Bukele took office in 2019, but had also taken part in them. Oh. Those meetings, the Treasury report said, were part of the Bukele government's efforts to negotiate a secret truce with gang leadership. During the negotiations, MS-13 leaders agreed to give their political support to Mr. Bukele's Nuevas Ideas party. New Ideas Party. Is that right? Nuevas? Okay. Or is that our ideas? Nuevas. I guess new ideas. All right. My Spanish is pretty rusty. I'm doubting myself. But okay. Which ultimately won a 2/3 supermajority, by the way, in the 2021 legislative elections. Isn't that something? Controlled by gangs. Fulfilling its side of the bargain, U.S. officials said the Bukele government provided the gangsters with money and, for those who were in custody, mobile phones and prostitutes. That sounds like a party. Mr. Bukele scoffed at the allegations. How can they put out such an obvious lie without anybody questioning it? He wrote in a social media post. Inside the Biden administration, there was broader worry about the Salvadoran president. 4 former officials who focus on Latin American affairs said that U.S. officials had been concerned about the allegations of Mr. Bukele's ties to Salvadoran gangs, going back to his stint as the mayor of San Salvador from 2015 to 2018. But there was debate about how much to call him out amid a growing migrant crisis, particularly as the president made moves that raised alarm over due process and human rights in El Salvador. As one former official put it, the Biden administration wanted to pick our battles with Mr. Bukele. In 2022, an outburst of violence signaled the breakdown of any pact between Mr. Bukele's government and top MS-13 leaders. Mr. Bukele imposed a state of emergency, leading police and security forces to carry out mass arrests of tens of thousands of people accused of being gang members or collaborators, many of whom were innocent, human rights groups said. Despite this, his approval rating soared as crime rates plummeted. The Bukele government had been dismantling the Salvadoran investigative units that had scrutinized the government's pact with the gangs and assisted U.S. investigators, and also threatened El Faro reporters for their work uncovering its dealings with the gangs, the journalists have said. Prosecutors and journalists have fled the country for their own safety. Scary. Though I guess there is a possibility that, well, we tried the approach of having a pact with the gangs, and it worked to a certain extent, but then, of course, it was discovered, and it is possible that having gained power, Bukele said, all right, he may have said, no, this has been wrong all along, and we shouldn't rely on this method of controlling crime in this country. Or he may have said, they are outstripping my ability to control them, but I have gained control of the government. What I'm going to do with it is break my pact with them and put them all in prison. And that's double-crossing, but we're double-crossing criminals, so maybe that's okay, and people will really like it. That may have been what he did. It's very difficult to sort it out and hard to know. The Bukele government had been dismantling the Salvadoran investigative units. That's an interesting telltale thing too, right? Well, why don't we get rid of all the people who know about the previous deals? Oh, well, that would be a good way of covering our tracks. But if we're doing it as part of an overall effort to actually put those people in prison and not be called out for hypocrisy in doing so, maybe it's all to the good. Sure. I have a feeling there's problems with it. Next up, Vulcan 2.0. In early 2023, Mr. Durham, the younger, of course, led his colleagues at Vulcan into a new phase of their efforts to take down MS-13. That February, the task force announced the arrest of 3 gang leaders, including Mr. Arevalo, the man known as Vampiro, who was captured in Mexico, then sent to the United States. The arrests were based on a sprawling second indictment charging Mr. Arevalo and 12 other high-ranking MS-13 leaders with an array of narco-terrorism crimes. Only by combating MS-13's command and control structure and bringing the transnational criminal organization's highest-ranking leaders to justice in the United States will we be able to break the persistent cycles of violence that have plagued our communities, Mr. Durham said in the announcement. Not what Mr. Bukele said, but rather Mr. Durham. Some of the most explosive revelations concerned Mr. Luna and Mr. Marroquin, identified in the 42-page document only by their government positions. Mr. Durham's prosecutors disclosed that the 2 men had met numerous times inside Salvadoran prisons with top MS-13 leaders, including there's a top MS-13 leader named Elmer Canales Rivera, also known as Crook, just being very straightforward with his nickname. The indictment also asserted that the gangsters had asked for assurances from the Bukele government that they would not be extradited to face prosecution in the United States. Indeed, when the United States originally asked El Salvador to extradite Mr. Canales, not Abrego Garcia, but Canales, several high-level Salvadoran officials set the gang leader, it doesn't say several, but some anyway, high-level Salvadoran officials set the gang leader up in a luxury apartment, gave him a firearm. This sounds very suspiciously like an unwise idea. And then, prosecutor said, made arrangements to get him out of the country. He remained a fugitive until he was caught by Mexican authorities and placed in American custody in November of 2023. Why Mexico? Why go closer to the United States? I don't know. As the Vulcan team pursued its second case, investigators found evidence that it was not just a few bad apples in the Bukele administration working with MS-13. There were ties to the gang at the highest levels of government, one former official with knowledge of the inquiry said. Mr. Marroquin, a close aide to Mr. Bukele, was suspected of funneling to MS-13 resources from the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID. But that's been scrapped now, so those tracks are covered. And those resources were coordinated on the ground by a Salvadoran aid program that he ran, Marroquin, that is, called Tejido Social, according to 3 people familiar with the case. The aid, which financed community centers outfitted with libraries, computers, and other amenities, was believed to have been directed to MS-13 neighborhoods as incentives for gang leaders to cooperate. Which brings us around once again to the other side, or the flip side, of gang power in El Salvador and elsewhere. Why would people put up with these corrupt gangs controlling their lives? Well, one thing, guns, they'll murder you. And 2, sometimes they actually work to ingratiate themselves to the communities that agree to knuckle under to them. We're the ones improving your lives. We're your government now. Look at me. And I mean, this is a good and should have been a conscious invocation of that from the captain. Look at me. I'm the captain now. What was the name of the movie? I can't remember. Was it the captain? I can't recall. But the Somalian pirates, between Somalian warlords and the pirates there, and American gangsters too, for the longest time, even, the infamous mafia mobs of their heyday very often were involved in providing community services in order to ingratiate the people in the neighborhood to them and to keep them quiet when they might have witnessed a crime, for instance. Anyway, the Salvadoran government also appeared to be directly siphoning off U.S. government aid to the gangs. One senior Salvadoran official laid out the scheme in a presentation to Vulcan investigators in a meeting in Washington in the spring of 2021, according to Mr. Musto, an early member of the task force. While the bulk of U.S. funds went to real projects, some of that money was going to pay the gang members too, he said. And so I'm sure Trump will point to that. That's why we were getting rid of USAID, except they were also, had established this relationship and reestablished it upon his entry into office a second time, I'm sure. It was around this time that the Vulcan team asked the Treasury Department to review the bank accounts of top Salvadoran officials, including Mr. Bukele's, as part of the effort to trace the U.S. funds, according to Mr. Musto. U.S. prosecutors occasionally investigate foreign heads of state, but it is rare to pursue a case against a sitting leader, which can carry significant diplomatic consequences. And that too is a great excuse for doing this stuff. Well, you're getting in the way of the diplomacy, the diplomatic efforts of the United States, and that's a presidential prerogative, and back off national security. Mr. Musto, who left the task force in late 2021, said he did not know what came of the request. The Treasury Department did not respond to a request for comment. As soon as Treasury officials imposed sanctions on Mr. Marroquin in late 2021, USAID ended its relationship with Tejido Social, according to 5 former U.S. officials. And maybe that's part of the reason that Trump hates them so much. They were stand-up people who said, if there's any hint of corruption, we got to end this program. Whatever it might be doing in El Salvador, whatever good it might be doing, we can't be involved with corrupt officialdom like this. Oh, yeah? Well, you cut off the payments to my corrupt officials. Now we're going to cut off payments to you. The unraveling of some of Vulcan's work began weeks into Trump's second term. By early February, the United States had struck its deal with El Salvador, and Mr. Bukele wanted his gang leaders back. The day after the agreement was announced, the Salvadoran ambassador to Washington, Milena Mayorga, said in an interview that Mr. Bukele requested that MS-13 leaders be among those deported to El Salvador, quote, as a matter of honor. The cover being, we'll punish those guys, not you. For some on Mr. Durham's team, who had been building cases for years, the Trump administration's pivot was deeply frustrating. Nevertheless, on March 11th, Mr. Durham sent a letter to Judge Joan M. Azraq, who was overseeing both of the MS-13 leadership indictments, saying the United States was seeking to dismiss all charges against Mr. Lopez, a defendant in the first case. The letter, filed under seal, asserted that the Vulcan team believed that the evidence in the case was strong, but the new administration had, quote, important foreign policy considerations and national security concerns, all in quotes there, that required dropping the case and returning Mr. Lopez to El Salvador. Mr. Durham wrote, what about the angel moms, huh? Oh, well, screw them. Anyway, that same day, before defense lawyers had much time to react, Judge Azraq granted the request. Mr. Lopez was placed on a plane 4 days later and flown into the custody of Salvadoran jailers. Now, it's interesting there because you don't know who's doing what exactly. The defense lawyers wanted a chance to react. The defense lawyers may have known something was going on. The Salvadoran government says, well, as a matter of honor, we want these people back. Well, we'll, punish them. And you might think, oh, well, are they going to punish them or are they going to wink, wink and release them? Or are they, in fact, going to punish them? Or maybe it's not punishment. They're just going to get them there and kill them because they know too much. That's why the defense attorneys might have been like, actually, maybe this isn't great. We want to fight that dropping of the charges. Just like with immigration cases where suddenly people are having the charges against them dropped, but that just means that they're no longer before the court and are therefore eligible for the, radical deportation programs that the Trump administration has put in place. So you got people saying, no, please don't drop the charges against me. On April 1st, prosecutors went back to Judge Azraq, asking again under seal to dismiss the charges against Mr. Arevalo. This time, defense lawyers put up a fight. Louis M. Freeman and Thomas H. Nooter, Nooter, that's unusual looking, lawyers for Mr. Arevalo, said in a letter to the judge this month that the U.S. government knew it was likely that their client would be, quote, tortured or disappeared if he returned to El Salvador because Mr. Bukele wanted to silence him. They asked the judge to unseal the government's request to dismiss the charges, which she granted. And we'll have to take a look at those things, but realize again where we are in all this. Oh my God, we have to do something because we can't deport this guy. He'll be tortured or disappeared if he's returned to El Salvador. Yeah, but you should probably keep in mind that he is a MS-13 leader so vicious he's known as Vampiro. Now, we're not supposed to endorse the torture, disappearing, extrajudicial killings of these guys in El Salvador any more than we should endorse them here. But it's not the same. Although I'm sure it gives the Trump guys no end of pleasure to be able to say, hey, who's to say whether Kilmar Abrego Garcia isn't also this dirty? We just don't know. And, the whole structure of law and order in the United States begins to break down in trying to figure out the structure of law and order, which is broken down already, in El Salvador. Wow. It can be crazy. So, all right, they asked the judge, the defense lawyers for Vampiro here, unseal the government's request to dismiss the charges. She said, okay. In response, Durham, the younger, did not address the substance of those accusations, but reiterated that the charges against Mr. Arevalo must yield to the administration's geopolitical imperatives. One defense lawyer familiar with some of the MS-13 prosecutions described the developments as kind of mind-boggling, and they really are when you consider all the directions in which lies could be flying. So mind-boggling. The Justice Department, he said, was having its cases, quote, literally pulled out from under them. It's all rather amazing. And I guess, I don't know, to me, the thing to keep in mind is the cynicism with which the whole thing was played. Trump brought the mother of one of these murdered girls to his State of the Union. I am your revenge. I'll be your retribution. We're going to get these guys. We're going to go to the ends of the earth to prosecute these guys. And maybe we will, maybe we won't. But as it turns out, we're going to spring them from jail in the United States. Will it be for them to live a secret life of luxury in El Salvador as Nayib Bukele's, partners in crime? Or will it be for them to be secretly executed and possibly tortured along the way, not because of the crimes that they committed, but because they could reveal the crimes that Nayib Bukele committed, and therefore they had to be eliminated. So they won't even be tortured and murdered for the quote-unquote right reasons either. Of course, it may be that the angel moms don't care what the reasons are that they're tortured and murdered, just so long as they are, except it's really quite un-American to root for things like that. And they might not even be getting it. Things may go the opposite direction. They might be living in a luxury apartment with firearms and protected from extradition to the United States forever and ever. Who knows? I don't know. You don't know. You won't find out because national security and geopolitical imperatives. And if you trust that Donald Trump is straightening it all out, and you might if you are a Long Island mom of a murdered high schooler, you may very well be one of those people. You're never going to find out. But Trump will tell you it went all went for the betterment of America or something like that. And if it didn't, it was probably a Democrat that did it anyway, even though highly unlikely that that's the case. All right, that was a long story. They're all long stories. But this is what we do with Tuesdays and with Fridays. And we maybe end up doing this with our Thursdays and our Mondays as well as we take off for the big holiday weekend. So now the only remaining question domestically, do they pass the one big beautiful bill with all of its crap and all of its fig leaves in time for Donald Trump to sign it for July 4th, which was also a very childish demand to begin with. Greg told us about that one yesterday. He wants the whole thing on his desk so he can sign it either before July 4th or on July 4th and make a show of it in front of the cameras for Independence Day, which, by the way, I'm also the king. Thanks to the big, beautiful bill I'm signing as well, which is an irony all in itself. Okay, time now for us to hand things over to Justice Putnam for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, which follows this as usual, right here on Netroots Radio. What's on top of the list? Trump rushed off to the Florida Everglades concentration camp for the alligator feeding time. It's from Alligator Alcatraz.
You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
I did see someone reporting that there was FAA information released yesterday that indicated that Trump would be making a trip there. I thought it might be over July 4th, but I guess not. On the rest of his menu, Trump is appealing the judicial order, striking down his executive order that targeted law firm Perkins Coie. One by one, these things are falling apart. We'll see you tomorrow.